A good SpongeBob episode is one that strives to be as silly and entertaining as possible, while still providing a well-rounded story that makes you as happy as the jokes. However, the longer it's stayed on the air, the less reliable it's been in all those regards. Even today, where it's creatively in a better spot than it was a decade ago, it feels like a relic that's made to print money first and entertain second. But back around the tipping point where it began to get harder to still call a good show, an episode aired that wasn't made as a joke fest, but more as a call for help: The Krusty Sponge. It was written by veteran SpongeBob writer Aaron Springer and then newbie Eric Shaw, and throughout it you can kind of feel the classic and middle eras of the show fighting for presence. Like the best Krusty Krab-centered episodes of yore, it says something about an aspect of business culture and its effects on employees, whether it's gimmicks, advertisement, or employee morale. But it's also very lame at points, mucking about trying to find jokes to make that don't need to be made, or dragging scenes out to fill time. But this dichotomy actually ends up helping the core message of the episode, which starts on a slow day at the Krusty Krab. Slower than a usual slow day, one order taking 20 seconds. But SpongeBob's frozen in a trance when Squidward comes to check up on him, which Mr. Krabs recognizes as a 1,000-yard stare, which they find out was induced by today being the day a food critic arrives. Krabs goes into this trance too, which makes me go, ark, 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 ark. Gotta find humor somewhere, because the intro is still really slow. One might even say atmospheric. The food critic, Gene Shalit, arrives, a play on his guest voice, actual film critic Gene Shalit, who appears in the Square Roots documentary for some reason.
Yes, I saw the movie and I liked it a lot. I will never know how SpongeBob learned all those lines.
I mean, just because he appeared in one episode doesn't mean it's important to ask him about the movie, and it's not like SpongeBob's the only show he's guest starred in. I still remember his cameo in the pilot episode of The Critic. Has anyone here seen The Critic? I did a review of it last year. Good lord, is the story ever gonna start? Okay, SpongeBob makes a patty, Gene eats it, leaves without a word, and we cut to the TV.
And there were no survivors.
Gene has seemingly instantly got a take on the Krusty Krab, but unfortunately, it's an absolute thrashing. He hates the way it smells and doesn't like the food.
However,
He thought SpongeBob was the best part of the whole visit. For those who might have forgotten, SpongeBob has done almost nothing this entire episode, and only speaks for the first time 4 minutes and 20 seconds in.
Well, back to work.
Now, don't worry, this is where the episode starts to get good. Mr. Krabs takes the critic's advice about SpongeBob being the only good thing about his restaurant by branding it around him. Squidward now has to meet and greet people in a SpongeBob costume and cook patties as SpongeBob so as not to destroy the illusion, while SpongeBob's stuck manning a train ride for his adoring fans. Mr. Krabs, as usual, doesn't care much about their troubles and doubles down on the sponge mania by buying merchandise and reselling old yellow patties as spongy patties. I would have thought he'd learned his lesson on selling tainted meat, but we need a villain. If it feels like we've gotten from a restaurant review to a zombie invasion super quickly, that's because we have. It took 5 minutes to get from A to B, which I think is the episode's biggest weakness: very poor pacing. There are episodes in the following few seasons that are worse at pacing themselves, Bubble Troubles comes to mind, but it's still a barrier to the Krusty Sponge's rewatch value. At least the ending moves at a more moderate speed. Krabs realizes what he did was wrong, right as a cop is in the Krusty Krab, so he gets sent to court. But since the judge is a big fan of SpongeBob, he lets Krabs off scot-free without even a warning. This episode certainly has a plot, but I think it could have been more manageably timed so this ending doesn't feel so willy-nilly. Because below the surface, I think this was a brilliant idea for a SpongeBob episode. It was made at just the right time, dang, 13 years ago, and what it says about corporate mascots, and by extent the SpongeBob franchise, is more relevant now than it was in 2007. They nail the stuff about their impacts being profitable at the cost of the company's image, and how one dangerous publicity stunt can soil everything. and it says these things while still being funny and clever.
What's with the new sign?
Oh, just making a few cosmetic changes.
Oh, you mean like when Squidward had that mole taken off his...
Well, yeah, a little bit like that.
Some may argue that Squidward being stuck in a SpongeBob costume through the whole ordeal isn't all that great, knowing the show's track record with him around this time, but it's got multiple purposes, one of them being funny. I just think he shouldn't still be getting whipped at the end, he'd suffered enough by then. And the products they make, that's the best thing about the episode to me. Barring the SpongeBob costume, there's the SpongeBob ice cubes that are gonna look horrifying when they melt, if the ice creams have taught us anything. You've also got this bib that reads, "I soiled myself at the Krusty Sponge," which is just begging to be taken out of context. But come on, the best of these have to be the condiments, tangy spongy sauce, and the legendary mild Bobby sauce. I have no idea why this was thought up, but it was, and I'm happy with it. And it's great how most of the merch looks a bit off model. I know Aaron Spring is the storyboard director here, and his specific flavour isn't one I'm fond of in this era, but having most of the SpongeBob art just look a bit off really sells that these images of SpongeBob don't have the same soul as the real SpongeBob. They're made for a profit. They're part of the system. Has anyone played Rehydrated yet? I've heard it's pretty good. Characterization in the Krusty Sponge makes sense, I guess. SpongeBob himself only does two things: make the patty that pleases Gene in the first place, and replaces himself with a SpongeBob statue to get back into the kitchen. Those are the only two things he actively does. It's more about his public image than his participation in it, which kind of parallels how popular the show's publicity has been since the mid-2000s. I guess that's the point. Mr. Krabs is his usual self here, chasing a money-making scheme, indulging in the profits, but then having it backfire. But him getting away with it without even a slap on the big meaty claw is a little unsatisfying. Squidward's just meant to be tossed around. The judge at the end, you might want to invest in a newer wig, buddy. Word of advice, tall wigs are all the rage. Oh, and Gene Shalit is on the jury for some reason. I guess that makes sense, and keeps the inciting incident a prominent part of the story. But the story isn't why I come back to this one. Rather, it's the subtext. With the future of SpongeBob looking more corporation-based than ever, which I'll address in another video, this episode needs to become more popular. Not because it's that great or anything, but as a warning to take care of icons properly, before the bubble bursts and it's brought to question whether it's done more harm than good to its industry. SpongeBob's had some close calls in meeting this fate, so the message here needs to be absorbed. Pun completely intended. Goodbye for now.